Now that we're ready to get started, I'll pass it over to Planning and Conservation Manager with Meewasin, Mike Balonis, to send some greetings from Meewasin. Take it away, Mike.
Thanks, Michelle, and hello and welcome to everyone who's joined us today for this webinar. This is our first webinar all about citizen science, and so thank you all so much for taking the time to join us. Meewasin, the Cree word for beautiful, is a non-profit organization that has stewarded our river valley and area for a short 41 years. And the reason why we say short 41 years is because Indigenous peoples have been stewards of this river valley for over 6,000 years. It's critically important that we acknowledge our original caretakers of our land on Treaty 6 territory and homeland of the Métis. Meewasin's jurisdiction, that we call the Meewasin Valley, is over 67 square kilometers of land and has over 90 kilometers of established trail, which has seen up to 1.65 million trail visits per year. The area also features sites that help people to connect to nature through experiences such as Beaver Creek Conservation Area, the Meewasin Northeast Swale, Saskatoon Natural Grasslands, the River Landing Spray Area, and the Cameco Meewasin Skating Rink at Nutrient Plaza. Meewasin is a nonprofit organization that relies on donations and volunteers for our sustainability. Thank you for joining us today and for your interest in becoming a steward alongside us. Renny, Meewasin's Resource Management Officer, will now dive in about how easy it is to get involved and to become a citizen scientist, a safe outdoor activity for anyone, even during COVID. To get involved or learn more at any time, visit meewasin.com. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Mike and Michelle. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's a nice, balmy -28 outside right now, and I hope everyone's been having some opportunities to get outside and enjoying winter. So yeah, then today I'm speaking about finding your inner citizen scientist. And I see a lot of people that have registered today are actually a lot of keen volunteers that are out and about the River Valley that help us collect data on different aspects of what's outside in the Meewasin Valley. So Mike gave us a great introduction about Meewasin. And with our mandate, we're sort of a three-prong approach mandate. We have the conservation side of our mandate, also education and awareness, and then also development aspects, so providing access to the River Valley. And so the citizen science and the data that's collected by volunteers and Meewasin staff that are part of the citizen science project really helps feed into all aspects of Meewasin. It helps guide our resource management activities on how we manage our sites and the River Valley. It impacts how we deliver education programs to school groups and to adults within the valley. And then from a development perspective, it helps guide our restoration efforts, post-construction, or even how we design our different projects. And so the role that citizen science plays is becoming more and more important in how we deliver our programs at Meewasin. As was indicated by Mike, our jurisdiction covers 6,700 hectares of land of the South Saskatchewan River Valley, pretty much from Pike Lake up to past the Clarkborough Ferry crossing between Warman and Aberdeen. And that diversity of land in that river valley really is quite unique. We have everything from islands in the river, like Yorith Island, south of the city, to grassland sites within the city limits, like Saskatoon Natural Grasslands, to the Northeast Swale, to sand dune complexes south of the city at Beaver Creek and Cranberry Flats. So each of these habitats really provides a unique habitat for species, and the more we explore and more we experience these habitats, the more we learn as well. And it's really diverse and very ecologically rich. If you're an explorer of the River Valley and you know some of these sites, you know how diverse and how different each of these sites can be. And so, yeah, I hope you can get out and enjoy them this winter, if not this spring when things warm up and thaw out. I hope you can really enjoy the River Valley. I'd like to thank TD Friends of the Environment. They've provided tremendous support to Meewasin over the last several years with our citizen science programming, funding different events like eco scavenger hunts and BioBlitz activities. This picture is actually pre-COVID. You can see everyone's crowded together. This was a BioBlitz event we had at the Northeast Swale back in 2018. where we were collecting citizen science data from 4 a.m. to about 9 p.m. that day. And we had over 150 volunteers come out throughout the day to help us collect various data sets, everything from insects to water quality to birds to looking for fireflies in the evening. So what is citizen science? Citizen science is actually a way for members of the public to actively participate in monitoring and scientific research. It's not just no longer the researchers sitting at the university or in research labs at Agriculture Canada or Environment Canada. This is a way to get people out and contributing to this scientific research. And this participation can be from everything from collecting data to help generate research questions, analysis, evaluation, and reporting. And so every little aspect that's collected, every little piece of data that's collected has a value. And it may not, you may not see the value right now, but maybe 5, 10, 20 years from now, that information could be very valuable from a research perspective. So I found this great quote from Alberta. They have actually a citizen science strategy for Alberta parks. And this is Dr. Fred Rona. He's the chief scientist with Alberta Environment and Parks. And he says that citizen science offers an approach that can change the way scientific data and information is collected and shared, improving accessibility, transparency, and credibility in monitoring and science. As citizen science continues to grow, it is important to consider how we can support it. And so this is really a big emphasis of the citizen science, is that transparency and that accessibility to the data. Instead of having data sitting in reports or on people's computers, it's actually shared on different platforms, and it is being able to be accessed by the general public and by researchers. And so Meewasin has been really supportive of the citizen science movement in the Saskatoon region and the value it has from that larger research component, but also that engagement of amateur naturalists and people interested in nature. So one of the things that Meewasin is currently working on, and this is still very draft, we haven't finalized this project yet, but this is, we're developing a a valley-wide monitoring framework for Meewasin. And what the framework is looking at is different scales of monitoring and what those different scales can provide in level of detail. So we can look at project level monitoring. So say when we're doing sheep grazing at the Northeast Swale, where we bring our sheep in every year to do some targeted grazing, we are doing a component of monitoring to see the impacts of that grazing activity. Also, we do monitoring at the site level, so at the individual conservation sites, so whether it's Beaver Creek Conservation Area or the Northeast Swale. Also, we may want to roll monitoring into specific targets, so like the South Saskatchewan River or into the different swales or collectively across all the grasslands. This data can be rolled up at a regional level, and also that data can be rolled up at provincial and national levels. And so things like monitoring for invasive species such as leafy spurge, we could be monitoring that at the individual project level because we're doing targeted grazing to control leafy spurge, and so we're monitoring the impacts of our grazing. We could be monitoring the leafy spurge at the site level to look at the population trends within the site. We could be monitoring that impact of leafy spurge across all the grasslands within the Saskatoon region. This data could be rolled up and provided with other partners such as the Armacorbin Park or the City of Saskatoon to see what kind of impact leafy spurge control is having at the regional level. And then this data can be rolled up into the provincial as well to see what kind of work is being done or impacts being done on leafy spurge control. So we're looking at this as sort of our approach for monitoring and with our partners. And we're still in the development stages of this framework, and we're hoping by spring we could be rolling out this strategy. And it's being able to use this data at multiple scales and having different levels of detail as well. So with citizen science, there's so many different apps and programs out there, and different ways of collecting data. And some of it's really specialized, right down to a specific species. Some of it's more larger data collection sets, and some of it's ran by international organizations. Some's ran through local regional organizations or universities, and some are actually ran with by local groups such as the Saskatoon Nature Society that collects the data and is shared up to an international body. And so today what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover some of these different citizen science programs and just sort of give you a sort of a brief introduction to them and what they are all about. So the Plant Watch program, this was developed approximately about 20 years ago out of University of Alberta, and it's now ran as part of the Nature Watch program. And what they are looking at is flowering dates of different species across Canada. And they're using these flowering dates to study climate change and seeing if over time, if these flowering dates correspond with changes in climate and if there is a change in flowering. Here in Saskatchewan, there was some research done out of Swift Current Agriculture and Research Station way back in the 50s on flowering dates of many of native Saskatchewan wildflowers. And so part of this research is looking at comparing to those historical data to our current flowering dates. So a lot of the species that are being looked at are that are available for Saskatchewan are a lot of native plants, but also there's some that are planted in Saskatoon like larch and lodgepole pine. But there's also a lot of native species as well, and even invasive species like common dandelion that are used for this monitoring. So prairie crocus, I think everyone that's watching today is waiting for those crocuses to flower, hopefully in the next 6 to 8 weeks. And so that is actually one of the species that are being used for tracking over time. So actually, Meewasin is going to be launching a Crocus Watch sort of contest in the next couple of weeks. And so trying to encourage people to go out and record and take pictures of when they find their first crocus flowering at the different sites along the river valley, whether it's Crocus Prairie or Northeast Swale or Beaver Creek or Cranberry Flats. And so we're going to be using that information into this Plant Watch program. And so it's a really easy used app. And you just record the species, your location, and sort of what is it the first time you've seen it flowering that year. And so this data is being used for researchers for climate change over time. This Frog Watch program is another program through the Nature Watch group. And what they're frogs have seen a major decline in occurrence and population over the last 30 years. And so this Frog Watch program is to get people to start recording every time they observe a frog. And whether it's you see it in person or you hear the calls. So if you go onto this website, they actually have some good information on actually how to distinguish the calls between a boreal chorus frog or a wood frog or a northern leopard frog. And so they're encouraging people to just record the observations of these frog species and the toad species, their location, were they singing or were they in breeding habitat or other conditions. And so to get an idea of population trends of northern leopard or of different frog species, but also occurrences of them as well. Here in Saskatchewan, the northern leopard frog is actually listed as a species of risk. So it's actually becoming quite important for documenting species like northern leopard frogs because of they are critical species. They have different habitat types. So they have a spring breeding habitat, they have wintering habitat as well, and then also foraging habitat. So the spring ponds are where they have their young. The foraging habitat is usually grasslands where they're out foraging. And then the wintering habitat, quite often you can find them along the riverbank in early fall, and they sort of use the springs along the riverbank as part of their wintering habitat. So documenting the occurrences of these potential locations of where they go into hibernation for the winter is quite critical so that we can start making sure that we manage and protect those critical habitats for these species. Another program through Nature Watch is something called the Milkweed Watch. And so the Milkweed Watch is actually tied in with the monarch butterfly. The monarch butterfly is actually also listed as a species at risk, and they require milkweed species as part of for laying their eggs and for their caterpillars and their larvae to feed on the milkweed. We are on the northern extreme of the range for monarch butterflies, but they are seen in the Saskatoon region periodically. This picture here is of monarch caterpillar that we took a picture of at Beaver Creek Conservation Area this summer, feeding on some low milkweed, and actually in a restoration field that we had. And so as I was pulling together this presentation, I remembered I forgot to document this occurrence with the Milkweed Watch. And so this occurrence has now been shared with that organization. And it also helps to give some trends as well on sort of the occurrence of monarchs and how far how widespread their distribution is on a given year, and also are they breeding breeding habitat as well. And so I think a lot of people are starting to grow milkweeds in their yards. And so if you do ever see monarch, either butterfly or caterpillar, I really encourage you to use the Milkweed Watch as a way to document those occurrences of monarchs. This is a program that's being ran out of the University of Calgary, or sorry, the Mistakis Institute in Alberta, and it's in partnership with the Ministry of Environment here in Saskatchewan and different government agencies in Alberta, also the Alberta Conservation Association. And the pronghorn crossing program is intended to document occurrences of where it started out, where occurrences of where pronghorn antelope are crossing highways in southern Alberta. And so they can get an idea of where the potential movement corridors of pronghorn are. The program got expanded into Saskatchewan, and also they expanded it into other species as well. So not just pronghorn, but also white-tailed deer, mule deer, and moose. And so this picture was shared to me by Peter Barron. He is a photographer here in Saskatoon that's out at the Northeast Swale all the time. And these are some pictures of some antelope crossing Highway 376 near Arley, just west of Saskatoon. And so the intention is to record these occurrences of where these animals are crossing, and then that information can be used by different agencies to help mitigate impacts of wildlife crossing. So like here in Saskatoon, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with the Northeast Swale, Central Avenue, and McCormick Drive, and a lot of concerns with the speed limits and discussion about the speed limits in through that area. And so this app can be used in the Saskatoon region to document the occurrence of deer crossing in that area. So it's not just deer that are crossing the roads, but also when deer are seen as you're driving down the road and they're hanging out adjacent to the road as well. You can fill out the app, or you can use it on your computer at home and document the occurrence and time and location. Of course, with all these apps, it's always good to have pictures if you have, but of course, it depends if you're driving or not. Definitely don't use this app while you're driving, but if you have a co-pilot with you, it's a great tool to document the occurrences. So these pictures were also shared with me with Peter, and you can see the deer crossing. This one up in the top corner is Agra Road. You have the sidewalk on Central Avenue. This is on the corner of Agra Road and Central. This is on Central Avenue. So is this picture. And this is on Fedoric and Central here, or on Central Avenue as well. So this is a fairly new app that's been used for about 1.5 years now. And it's been quite popular with a lot of people. So I'm really trying to encourage people in Saskatoon to start using this app as well. So e-tick is actually, I hate to bring up the word tick at this time of year. That's one thing with -40, we don't see the ticks. But soon, well, in 2 months, when the snow melts, we'll start seeing ticks emerging. And so this is part of many research groups, Saskatchewan Health, and also the University of Saskatchewan are promoting this app to track the occurrence of ticks and the spread of ticks throughout North America. And here in Saskatchewan, our most common tick that we experience is the American dog tick, or a lot of people call them the deer tick, that we find as we go visit our natural areas around Saskatoon every spring and start crawling across us. But really part of this app is to document the spread of the black leg tick, which is part of the concern for spreading Lyme disease. And so the researchers are encouraging people to collect samples of the ticks that they have on themselves or their pets, take pictures of them and upload them to this app, and then also document the date, the time, and the occurrence, and also what if it was on yourself or your pet, and actually how many of the ticks were on you as well, so they can get an idea of population trends. So definitely something I'd like to encourage people to start using. We're starting to see the blackleg tick starting to move into Saskatchewan from Manitoba, and it would be really important to start tracking if this species is moving into the Saskatoon region. eBird. So if anyone in this in the webinar today is a birder, you've probably heard of eBird. This is out of the Cornell University in the United States developed, and it's sort of the Uber location for storing your birding records. So if anyone's an amateur bird watcher or semi-professional bird watcher, a lot of people use this for storing their occurrences. So eBird allows you to record species up to just the species itself, or you can get into the detail of the sex of the species, number of birds that you've seen within that flock, the location, the date. Also, there's a lot of projects that have been created for individual natural areas around Saskatoon and individual parks around Saskatoon as well. So it's become a really vast fountain of knowledge for birds data in North America. eBirds as well is also linked with the Cornell University and all about birds, and there's a lot of good resources and materials for identifying bird species as well. Photos, bird calls, and then also distribution maps. Also within eBird, you can go in there and you can start looking with all the data records that have been provided by various birders. You could start seeing trends on when to expect to see these individual bird species showing up in the Saskatoon region and when they start departing in the fall. And then if you do see some in the wintertime when you don't think they should be here, you could see those records too and see, oh yeah, someone had some records here in the past few years of a certain bird species overwintering here. So it's a really great birding. If you're really keen on birding and learning about birds, this is a really great app or website to become involved with, and just to learn more and more about our birds. Part of the Cornell University program is they've created a project called Project Feeder Watch. And Feeder Watch is just to, if you're not the avid birder to go out and trudging through the -40 looking at birds, but if you're a keen birder in your yard, just recording what you're seeing in your yards. And as I think what we've really noticed in the media, they've really talked about bird watching has really increased with COVID. And I think this winter as well, watching birds from your yard and from your window with feeders has been really popular. I know myself at home, my family, we live in Aberdeen, and we have 3 bird feeders out for black oil seeds, sunflower oil seeds, but also 3 peanut feeders and 5 suet feeders. And we're having a lot of fun watching the birds in our yard this winter, and watching the sort of the tendencies of which different birds come in at different times of day, from the magpie that sits on our porch deck to eating suet, to the chickadees stealing peanuts. So it's great to watch, and really encourage people to become engaged with Project Feeder Watch. Now, the Project Feeder Watch asks for a donation, but they do send you some materials on also how to identify some of the key bird species that occur in the wintertime in your feeder. And so there's sort of a window that they also encourage you to do the monitoring as well. And it's a great way to, from the comfort of your house, to get engaged with bird watching and providing data. And it's interesting, some of some people get some unique species that pop in. We actually had one in Aberdeen. We had a merlin buzz through our yard the other day, chasing a house sparrow, and I was just washing my dishes and saw this in my backyard. So it's a great way to engage in citizen science while enjoying watching the birds. iNaturalist is also sort of the Uber citizen science app for restoring data. So eBirds is really focused on birds. iNaturalist is focused on all species. And so everything from plants to insects to birds to mammals, you name it, you can store it in this iNaturalist database. And so what you do with this app is you can take pictures of the item that you discover, you can load it into the app, and then other people can go in there and confirm your observation. Also, as part of the app on your phone, it can give you some clues on to identify what the species might be. It's not 100% accurate, but it's one of these artificial intelligence platforms. So as more people document and upload these pictures and have confirmed IDs, the software becomes smarter and becomes better in identifying those species. So in this corner up here is a picture of Megan Mickelson. She's sort of one of our keen volunteers in citizen science, both from Meewasin and also Saskatoon Nature Society and Wild About Saskatoon. And she's out collecting citizen science data all the time and using iNaturalist. She started out by wanting to learn her plants, and so she was taking pictures of plants, uploading them to iNaturalist as a way to learn her plants, and then now she's evolved into learning about birds, and so she's doing the same thing. So she's a great amateur photographer, and she's recorded over 2,000 observations. And so, people like Megan and sharing that data has become quite valuable. And gives us a really good idea of what's out there in the Saskatoon region. IMAP invasives. So this is actually an app or a platform that's being ran through the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center and different states and provinces across North America. And it's a way of tracking invasive species. You have to sign up for an account through the Saskatchewan Conservation Data Center, and then you can start documenting invasive species, taking pictures, uploading them, putting their occurrences, maybe give an indication of how large of a patch the invasive species is. But for people like myself who deal with a lot of invasive species control, it's really valuable because Meewasin, we store our data in it, but also if people report new occurrences of invasive species that we're not aware about, we can get out there and get on top of them. And so it's becoming a really important application here in Saskatchewan. For reporting and documenting invasive species spread and control. And also the information that's stored in this database is used by the provincial government when they're planning invasive species funding programs for municipalities for control. And so the more data that's in this database, the more valuable it is for organizations and individuals that are doing weed control, that they can probably help provide additional funding. And I'll have some information, some maps later on with both eBird, iNaturalist, and IMAP invasives on how Meewasin uses it. So in terms of methods of collecting, the old tried and true method of collecting data through pen and paper, whether it's on individual journals or in people's diaries or even on field notes. I think a lot of us who's ever worked in the field of biology or ecology, this is what we learned. And so we have hundreds and hundreds of pages of data that's been written down on paper, quite often sitting in filing cabinets or sitting in notebooks. But then what do we do with that data? So that data is still very valuable, but sitting on paper doesn't help other people as well, right? So, so part of the citizen science movement is getting this data out of these paper and notebooks and into citizen science apps and databases. Also, handheld GPSs are very valuable to give us point location and very accurate location of some of these occurrences. So this one picture here of this little flower is a crowfoot violet, which is a rare plant species that we have at the Northeast Swale. And we actually have a couple occurrences at Beaver Creek Conservation Area. And so having those GPS coordinates recorded for these rare species really help us for going back and monitoring over time. Of course, photos are really helpful so that it helps document what was found, and then it also helps with confirmation of what we found. The various citizen science apps that I talked about all have different ways of recording photos and taking GPS coordinates off your cell phone if you have data enabled. And also it sort of substitutes that paper and pen for documentation as well. Also, a lot of people are doing sound recordings and using that to record species, especially on the birding side. There's a growing movement on recording birds calls. And then technology is advancing to develop autonomous recording devices. And I'm going to talk a little bit about those as well. And Meewasin has been exploring these devices to help record some of this data. So autonomous recording devices the technology is really evolving. And we've been dabbling with a piece of equipment here at Meewasin for the last year. And what it does is it's programmable, where you can set it up to record at sunrise every morning, and for 2 hours, and for recording bird calls. Also, you can add a microphone to this for doing ultrasonic for back calls. One of the challenges, you get hundreds or a lot of data from this. And my coworker Jamie had the privilege of going through the data this winter, going through some of these bird calls. And so I'm going to share with you a couple of the clips that she pulled for me. So this one here is an American robin and a spotted towhee. Hopefully you can hear it. Oh, sorry, I'm going to back up again. Let's see if this works. It worked when we were testing it. And then this other one here is of American warbler and a house wren. So it's a way of quite often with doing bird surveys, you're going out early in the morning, 4 a.m. right before dawn, and you're spending your 2-3 hours recording bird observations. And you can only catch those birds at the time that you're there, and also the location that you're at, right? So using these autonomous recorders allows you to sample over a larger period of time, and then also maybe catch species that you may have not caught when you were there. With the sample on the yellow warbler, I can also hear a mourning dove in the background sort of crying away. And so you can catch the multiple species. So one of the challenges is to sit there and listen to those recordings and try and document the species that you hear. And there's actually new software that's being developed that you can actually run it through these samples through, and it'll identify the different species for you, and then you can confirm that. So it's the technology is becoming more advanced. This unit was actually very expensive when we bought it, and it's like second generation technology. Now we're in newer generation technologies that they're the size of a small cell phone, and carries 3 AA batteries that you can mount, and that can do the recordings as well. So the technology and the prices drop significantly as well. So the technology is getting more advanced and more user-friendly as well, and easier to deploy. There's also items as well for documenting bat species. So I mentioned with the autonomous recorder that the big box we had, you could put an ultrasonic microphone on it to record bats, but also this Wildlife Acoustics also makes something called an eco-meter, which you can plug into a tablet or your iPhone or a smartphone that you can actually record the ultrasonic calls of bats. So bats you can't hear with our normal hearing, but these apps or this little device can actually read that ultrasonic. Now you're going to have to listen really closely. I'm going to be playing this is one of our sites in October. We tried this out and we captured hoary bats and big brown bats. Now it's really, really quiet, so listen really carefully. You'll hear the chatter of a big brown bat with this one. Okay, I'll play that again if you missed it. So you can hear that little bit of a chatter going on, and that was the big brown bat. Now the hoary bat doesn't really pick up as well. So if you hear it, it's sort of like a, and that's the hoary bat. So with the recordings with this unit, as you're walking through, you can look on your cell phone and you can see a sonogram pop up with the ultrasonic frequencies, and you can actually see if you're coming, if there's a bat being detected in the area. It was quite interesting as we were doing this in October. It was a nice warm evening, and we're walking down a road or a trail with lots of trees around, and we can pick up the sonic, but then every once in a while we'd see a bat fly by. So it's becoming a really interesting tool to use in doing bat surveys. Also, other autonomous recorders are things like wildlife cameras. And of course, wildlife cameras have been used for quite a few years, and have been used by a lot of different groups and agencies to record wildlife observations. This is just a sampling from around the Northeast Swale of some of the pictures we've taken over the last few years. And we have everything from this one corner here is a short-eared owl, which is actually a species at risk. That we observed. And actually when this photo, Megan Mickelson and a few other people with the Saskatoon Nature Society had seen the owl as well around that time, and they were taking pictures. It's interesting that I also caught it on one of our wildlife cameras. Also deer species, things like the northern harrier, moose, and this northern harrier up in this corner here in this one location of our trail camera. Every year he pops up, and usually quite often has a picture of some sort of animal that he's caught, typically ground squirrels. And there's the one year I saw he had a small frog as well in his talons. So it's interesting to use these wildlife cameras as a way to track wildlife around the region. Meewasin's involved with multiple partners, including Wild About Saskatoon, the Saskatoon Forestry Farm, Saskatoon Nature Society, the City of Saskatoon, and then also the University of Saskatchewan through Dr. Ryan Brooks' lab. Grad student Katie Harris is running a series of 30 wildlife cameras throughout the city, from sort of the downtown core out to the suburbs and out to the rural area to look at wildlife movement throughout the city and using different habitat types. And some of the initial information she's finding is that species like coyote like to be more on the outer fringes of the city, and species like fox like to be more in the inner core, but also we're finding other species like deer to be found throughout the city. So it's quite interesting data, and using these cameras is great because they take pictures 24/7. Depending on the temperatures, they might be running. I'm sure the cameras have shut down because of the cold weather this last week, but also gives us a good feel for what's out there, and a diversity of use of habitats as well. So it's a great project that Dr. Ryan Brook and Katie are leading, and we're going to see some great information coming out of that project. And so Meewasin ourselves, we have 40 to 50 cameras deployed throughout the River Valley on different projects, on different sites, and used for different things. And we definitely see some unique occurrences of species with our cameras. So this is actually a video recording. So these wildlife cameras as well, it does record. You can record video or pictures or sound. You can set it for taking multiple pictures. You can set it for timed pictures, or if it's motion detected, it's triggered. So this is actually from the sharp-tailed grouse lek at the Northeast Swale. And this is a short video. And if you watch really closely, you can see the sharp-tailed grouse pop up on the lek, and you can see the herd of deer walking through the lek, and you can see the wildlife coexist amongst each other. So it's actually a great video. So actually, I'll go. So if you were watching the video, you could see every once in a while the grouse move around. So right there, you can see a group of grouse right there. You can see this grouse here with his tail out. So he's actually on display on the lek. And so yeah, I'm going to back it up here. And so that you watch closely the birds here. So yeah, I counted 12 or 13 male grouse on the lek displaying while the deer out there grazing away. So it's a great way for monitoring wildlife and population trends as well. Also, there's a lot of, photography and video capture, and it's also a great way of documenting bird species. And if you are interested in citizen science and you do have the capability of taking some really good pictures and video, I really highly encourage you to share that because it does provide a really good background for people and some additional knowledge as well. So Jamie shared with me some videos as well that she took at Beaver Creek this spring. So this is a yellow warbler. And yeah, it makes the person feel a little bit warmer today, listening to the spring birds. And then this is American goldfinch. So that makes it nice cold weather to see those spring birds singing. But also there's other ways of recording songs as well. John Patterson with the Saskatoon Nature Society, as part of his hobby, he started actually doing more bird recordings and has actually acquired acoustic recording equipment for handheld recordings of bird species. And he's actually shared quite a few of his recordings with the Cornell University or the Cornell Lab. And so there's actually a great way to learn your birds. If you're really wanting to learn bird calls, really highly encourage you to visit that website and listen to some of those bird calls to learn your bird species. Also, there's other ways to get involved. You can go out on your own and collect citizen science data, or you could also get engaged with various groups that are running eco-scavenger hunts or BioBlitz events. And so over the years, Meewasin has ran events on different sites, the Northeast Swale and other locations, to collect citizen science data on all aspects of what's out there. And so these pictures are, one is at the small swale, which is located north of the Northeast Swale. And then these other two pictures are actually a location on the west riverbank south of Wanuskewin Heritage Park, where there is a green ash forest, a dense green ash forest. And it's we went there for doing a fall warbler visit with the Saskatoon Nature Society. Fortunately, the warblers hadn't arrived yet, but it was a great way to visit these locations, meet with other naturalists, learn from each other, and then also start collecting data on on these different sites. And so this data is also used when we often host these eco-scavenger hunts and BioBlitz events. We use this data for our for planning and management purposes. I'd like to give a shout out to the Saskatoon Nature Society, and their involvement in the citizen science has been tremendous over the last 60 plus years. If it wasn't for the support of those volunteers and their members on collecting data on bird occurrences, flowering dates of plants, butterflies, dragonflies. They've collected so much data, and so much knowledge has been collected by these members. And they have monthly meetings, and their monthly meetings with their membership, right now it's online, but you learn different aspects of nature. They have almost every weekend, there's field trips. They put on different training courses and webinars. Also, they lead the spring and Christmas bird counts in the Saskatoon region. And a lot of that data is very important global or internationally, but also at the local level, to see those trends on species movement, what new species are moving in, or actually which species are moving out of areas as well. And also, they lead an annual butterfly count as well. So I really highly encourage you to be a member of the Saskatoon Nature Society. It's a great way to be connected. If you're really interested in citizen science, it's a great way to meet with amateur and professional naturalists and to learn about different species. Also like to give a shout out to Katie and Aaron Suick. They own a small parcel of land just west of Saskatoon and they call it their parcel of land Restoring 71. And so it's 80 acres of land that was sort of just throwback or left alone hay fields and native prairie and wetlands that they've really started to learn and love over the years. And so they've been really, they're using citizen science on their own private land to learn more about their land, and they're sharing that information with people. And so they've actually created a bunch of network of hiking trails throughout their site and encourage people to come out through registration on their website to get out and explore their land. And they've been using a lot of the citizen science apps, also a lot of trail cameras and even acoustic recorders to document what's out on their land. And the list here, they've documented numerous species at risk on their sites as well. And who would think on a little piece of 80 acres that there'd be that many species at risk or rare species found, and they've documented it. And so, they've done a great job of showing how citizen science can be used even for your own on your own private property. So how does Meewasin use citizen science? So we use the citizen science as part of the data that's available as part of our planning efforts. So anytime we do a new design work on any new enhancement of maybe a segment of the Meewasin Trail, or we're looking at any potential projects that are being done by other agencies, we quite often pull in the citizen science data to see if there's been any occurrences of maybe species risk or rare species in those areas, and we use that as part of the planning process. We use this data as part of our baseline inventories and our long-term monitoring. And not only is our goal not just to use this data, but also to put our data back into these databases so other people can use that data as well. And so as we collect it, we're hoping to start incorporating that, return that data back into these systems. We use this data as part of our resource management planning. So when we're developing resource management plans, but also when we're doing our resource management activities. So I mentioned IMAP invasives, the occurrence of invasive species. We're using that data to know where potential invasive species are, but also we're using that app to store our management activities as well for invasive species. Also, the information we're wanting to share within our communications and our awareness through our school groups or with the general public. Also, what we're looking at is you can use this information creating site species lists. So we haven't done this yet, but we're looking at for some of our different sites, so say as the Northeast Swale, pulling in all the different data sources and then create an overall species list for a site. And so right now, in the past, it's been, the Native Plant Society of Saskatchewan or Saskatoon Nature Society have a sort of a running list of what they've observed, but we can pull the additional data from the citizen science as well to provide a more comprehensive list. So just sort of give you an example. So this is eBird and iNaturalist data from the Northeast Swale. So we pulled this from those databases. There was for eBird, there was 153 unique bird species that were recorded out of 2,800 observations. And so eBird, you can either do it down to the point location or to the site. And so that's why there's not as many green dots as there are blue dots from eBird, because it was over the entire site. But actually of those observations, there was 12 species at risk that were observed, and everything from bobolink to short-eared owl to northern were recorded, and loggerhead shrike were recorded as part of eBird through citizen science, people being out there on the site and watching their birds. iNaturalist, we've had a few less records, but definitely you can see that through iNaturalist there were 2 species at risk and 2 rare species that were documented. One of the species at risk was actually American badger, which wouldn't be captured through the eBird data. So this is data that's been recorded by other people on these sites, so it gives us a good feel for what's out there. This is an example of IMAP invasives. And so this is those dots, there's a lot of little dots, but it's 30 different unique weed species that are found on the site, 857 observations. And so for myself, as one of the people that deal with invasive species, if someone records a leafy spurge on a site like the Northeast Swale, I'll go in and find that location, and I'll deal with that occurrence of that weed species. So it becomes very valuable. This is an example from Chief Whitecap Park. So eBird, we've recorded 180 unique species and with 8,300 recorded observations. So you can see there's the occurrence of eBird data is those blue dots, the green dots is iNaturalist data. Definitely a lot less species have been recorded with iNaturalist on the site. So you can tell this site's being used by some keen birders out there, probably taking their dogs for a walk, and they're recording their bird species. But when you think of the diversity of 180 bird species on that site, it shows how diverse the Saskatoon region is. So it's just some take-home messages. Citizen science is anyone can be a citizen scientist. You can be an amateur or professional, but or just someone that's just not even amateur. You're just wanting to learn, and so you can become involved and share this information. If anyone in the room or in the webinar is an old 4-H'er, learn to do by doing. As you start using these citizen science apps, it becomes an opportunity to learn more about what's around you. Also, it's the ability to connect with other professionals and amateur naturalists. So, getting involved with BioBlitz events, or even being a screener on iNaturalist to confirm records. Also, this data, it can be collected. That is collected can be used by various groups. So other naturalist groups, like members of the Saskatoon Nature Society, if records are posted on eBirds on a species that hasn't been seen for a while, I know a lot of the Saskatoon Nature Society members go out and they go and investigate that bird occurrence. But it also can be used for planning purposes and also researchers as well. So it is a very important movement, the citizen science movement, and influences a lot of different aspects. I also want to give a shout out to Beaver Creek Conservation Area. With funding from the City of Saskatoon, Winter YXC, and TD Friends of the Environment. We've been encouraging people coming out to Beaver Creek on Saturdays to download iNaturalist and document what they see, whether it's plants, birds, animal tracks, deer, and getting out there. Unfortunately, this last weekend we were closed due to cold weather, and I think this Saturday too we're closed because of the forecast for the horrendous cold temperatures. But we're definitely encouraging people to go out to Beaver Creek and explore and use these citizen science apps and record what you see. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And I think we actually might have some questions. I'll get you, Michelle, to come in and maybe read the questions to me.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Renny, for your presentation. I think everyone can agree that those spring birds definitely warmed our souls up a little bit, and seeing those deers photobomb the cameras was pretty cute. So yeah, I'll dive into our question. We have a question from Samantha. They said, I live next to the Northeast Well, and I was wondering if the goal with these citizen science apps to document every instance of species we see, or just new ones that we have not documented before.
Yeah, no, great question. And I think for Samantha, I think if living near the swale, I think for look at it from your person, how you would like to use the data. So if you're interested in documenting anything new that you find and you want to create a checklist for yourself of all your species that you found at the Northeast Swale, I would suggest doing that. However, if you start finding things that are unique that you want to go back to and see, you found it flowering and you want to find it when it goes to seed, or maybe later in the year when it changes color, you may want to go and document that and record multiple occurrences of it, just so that you can go back and see it. So something like the crowfoot violet, which is a rare species, if you find anything that's rare or unique, you may want to record everything just because it's something that's unique. Another one would be maybe something like American badger. If you see a badger in one location, maybe record it again at a different location. So it really depends on what your goals are. Our goals is getting as much data as possible. So, if you want to record every Gaillardia flower that you found on the site, that adds to that information to that site. So yeah, it's all very helpful. So I guess it depends on what your interests are as well. And Samantha, since you're living near the swale, I'd really encourage you to use the Pronghorn Crossing app as well. So if you do see any deer adjacent to any of the roadways, just document them, and then we can get a feel for how many deer are out in the area and where they're located as well.
Awesome. Thanks, Renny. I've also allowed anybody to unmute themselves now if they want to speak up and ask a question, or feel free to pop it in the chat. We've just got about a minute left here. If anyone has any questions.
Oh, and thanks, Megan. I put the wrong Nature Watch website. It's naturewatch.ca, not .org. Thanks, Megan, for sharing that. That was my mistake. What else do we have here? Samantha. Okay, well, great. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, I really encourage you to explore the River Valley and, unfortunately, this COVID time has been really hard on everyone, and, we're all self-isolating and staying away from friends and family, but we've also seen a major increase in people getting out and exploring nature. And so, really take the time to explore nature and, learn more about what's around us in the River Valley. And I think you'll be quite surprised with what you can find. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, for joining. And I just want to add that we also have our do-it-yourself eco-scavenger hunts on our website, just for some inspiration on what species to look out for in different seasons. So you can find that on our Get Involved page at meewasin.com. All right, I think that is good for questions. We're just getting a lot of thank you. So great job, Renny.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.